services and understanding information through through voice, through things like Alexa and stuff like that. So actually, the Google search bar that we search into isn't going to be the interface we use to these search engines. So I'm wondering how we then, right now on the screen, you can see 10, 15, whatever results it is, right? And you can see that first page, but you can't present that in voice. You can't say,
right.
What's the best ERP system for a financial institution? Alexa's not going to say, well, there's probably 10-ish options, and one of them is like highlighted in red. I really like this one. This 8th one down, they look great. And it's not going to say that. It's going to say it's SAP or something like that, isn't it? And so I think it's going to be interesting as we move to interacting with the machine. The two things is we need to learn the language of the machine in order to get the best out of the machine, the same way as we need to learn how to teach the machine where our content is. And the other thing is we as marketers need people to search for us.
And that's a wrap. The Weekly Wrap, ending July 24th, 2020. This week we're wondering, are we creating real audiences? And we conclude search is busted. And how do we bring audiences together in the social distancing era? So let's wrap it up, shall we? Our theme this week, the real customer king. There's a quote that goes, "The customer is always right." But the full quote, as attributed to the wonderful retailer Marshall Field, goes, "Assume the customer is right until it is plain beyond all question that they're not." That's the real customer king. And this is the Weekly Wrap. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 79 of the Weekly Wrap, our weekly play on words that play in the world this week. This week, well, I've got some thoughts on real audiences, and we've got just a wonderful conversation with a good friend of mine, Mr. Ian Truscott. He's someone who's got the same tasty vintage view of content strategy that I do. As always, I'm your host, Robert Rose, Chief Strategy Advisor for the Content Marketing Institute, and it's time to get this week's show underway. Who are your real audiences? There's a quote that we marketers like to throw around, and it comes from the business guru, Mr. Peter Drucker, and it goes, "The business enterprise has two, and only these two, basic functions, marketing and innovation." But the first part of that quote is often omitted, and it actually explains why Drucker believed that marketing and innovation were so important to the business. He said, because it's the purpose of the business to create a customer, the business has only two and only these two functions. But what if we're creating customers that are actually not good for the purpose of our business? And at what point do we actually create a customer? If we knew the answer to the second question, perhaps we would know when or if there are customers we don't want to create. I was recently working with a vice president of marketing at a B2B software company, and one of the company's larger customers was threatening to leave a mere 6 months into their contract. They were, from any objective viewpoint, being really unreasonable. The implemented solution wasn't working for them, but it was because nobody at the client company had ever bothered to take the how-to or onboarding classes that the software company created. Basically, their expectation was that the software should just be intuitive enough that no training was needed. Now, the content that the brand had created for their how-to university was good, and most of their existing clients, quite frankly, had more value out of the software after having taken the coursework. But this company simply said, no, our people are too busy. They don't have the time to actually take this training. And so they were threatening to leave. So the vice president of marketing at the software company then offered the client a deal. They would provide a significant discount on a multi-year contract if the customer would guarantee a certain number of people to go through the content and actually take the training. They even offered to do the training live in a classroom setting. Well, the company refused. They said, yes, we'll take the multi-year contract and the discount, but we don't want to have to commit to the training as part of it. And that was the answer to the question that the company had been waiting for. Even though the client company had paid and was willing to commit to a multi-year contract, the VP of marketing knew that she hadn't created a real customer yet. She knew that this company would eventually be bad for the purpose of the business, and so she let them go on their way. Today, we content marketers now look at audiences with the same kinds of value that we do customers. We take a deep experiential view of their needs across the entirety of the journey. But as we start to look at audiences, we may well find that we're creating bad audiences too. Just as the trope of the customer is always right is wrong, so is the corollary that content practitioners may find some use in as well. Here's the thing, audiences, they're not always right either. And now here's a real audience builder for you. It's time to recognize that there's something we can do to put the experience back in customer experience. You know, businesses all over the world have recognized that great digital experiences, they're not a nice to have anymore. They are a must have. But how? How do you evolve into that? You know, the well-known saying that says content is king is wonderful, but how do customers create and publish wonderful, effective, engaging content that take their customer experiences to a whole new level? Well, our sponsor, Sitecore, recently held its inaugural Virtual Marketer Day, and one of the tracks there was dedicated to this, to helping organizations better manage their content from end to end. And they've got this free post-event guide called Understanding the End-to-End Content Lifecycle. It's got usable, practical, actionable steps that you can take to optimize your content engine, personalize digital experiences, and take your customer experience strategy to a whole other level. I want you to go download this guide today. You can see it right here and the cmi.media/sitecore-lifecycle. That's cmi.media/sitecore-lifecycle. I want to thank the good folks at Sitecore for being such a wonderful sponsor this summer and really, really appreciate their efforts. So now it's time for our interview segment, and we've got a great one for you this show. It's my really good friend, Ian Truscott. Ian's a wonderful guy, brilliant, certainly in his own right. He's a consultant in the digital marketing space. He's the editor-in-chief of Rockstar CMO, which is a wonderful podcast and blog, by the way, talking about all things marketing leadership. He's the executive strategy director at Apropingo, a consultancy based on B2B marketing, and we can give some trouble about that name a little later. He's a writer, speaker, industry expert, B2B marketing influencer, and most of all, as he says, and I really just love this, he's a content guy. Content marketing, content strategy, content management, all around content. He's the guy you want to talk to. And of course, Ian and I talked about content, of what else we're going to talk about. But we also talked about search, and especially why search really sucks so much right now. And of course, we giggled, as two friends often do. I think you're really going to like my interview with my friend Ian Truscott. Ian, my friend. How are you doing, my buddy? What's going on?
What's going on? Well, where do we start with what's going on in this crazy world? But yeah, I'm here to talk to you. I don't know that it gets much better than that.
Well, you're very, very, very kind. Of course, you're ensconced safely in the outskirts of London somewhere. But how is, here we are in the middle of the dumpster fire that is the United States. How are things there in the UK? The UK. Well, yes, not in Europe anymore, but certainly.
Yeah. I know we've had that. We've made reference to that in the past in our conversations. We seem to be coming out the worst of it, and I think people are starting to travel. The pubs are open, so that's exciting
Well,
for
that's
everybody.
important. Yeah.
I remember before we started lockdown, they interviewed somebody on the news standing outside the pub, and he was like, this country relies on pubs. There's no way we can cope, but we've survived this far, and we're back. So that's good. But obviously, what's happening there in the US is somewhat troubling, and is obviously affecting the mood here a little as well. So
yes, well, somewhat troubling, maybe the most English way to describe what's going on here in the United States that I've heard in some time. Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, you and I have known each other for, oh my gosh, I think it's coming up on 15 years that we've known each other.
Good Lord, yeah.
But for those in the audience who don't know who you are, please tell us your story. Where did you come from, and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, you warned me at the beginning we only have 15 minutes, so I'll give you the abridged version. I'm basically a technologist turned product marketer turned marketer. So I started my career as a Unix administrator in an old school computer room. I then moved into commercial roles, pre-sales. I moved into product development, product management, product marketing, became a CTO, then became led product marketing, become a CMO. So that's really my career. So I'm a self-taught marketer with some of these very books, and so that's my role. So most recently, I've been the CMO of marketing technology firms. I've always worked in software tech, and then right now I'm running an agency called Apropingo, mainly helping innovative B2B organizations find their voice, tell their story with content marketing. Called Apropingo. I should actually say the name of my company. That would help with the promotion. But yeah, called Apropingo.
And also, you're being shy, of course, and modest as you always are, the host of an amazing podcast, which of course I've had the pleasure of being on a few times.
Yes.
It's a brilliant podcast.
Rockstar CMO FM, yeah, and you put the awesomeness and brilliance into it, in my opinion, Robert. I think, and that's why I put you right at the end so that people will listen to me. So yeah, we do, and I also I do run rockstarcmo.com. I'm not suggesting I'm a rockstar CMO. It's a content vehicle to really find the voice of the sort of marketers you don't hear a lot about, and tell some of the stories you don't hear a lot about, rather than the listicles and all the bullshit advice you get everywhere else.
Yeah, it's got some amazing stuff on there. I mean, for sure. I mean, the blog is great. The podcast is great. And you are absolutely seeing and hearing voices that you don't otherwise, typically see on the usual suspects of channels. And so for that reason alone, I absolutely recommend it. Well, let's get to the news, because there's some interesting stuff that I want to get your take on here that's come up in the last couple of weeks here. As we deal with things like, Facebook and their boycott and all the things that are happening with, with social media, certainly one of the things that have come up recently is search and specifically Google. And really interesting article in Media Post that we'll of course link to in the show notes. And the article itself is entitled "Why Does Search Suck?" And I think for so many of us, especially those of us in marketing, we're having to deal with this. The article opens up by saying it used to be that search was a tool, and it was, to say the least, amazing. I'm not sure amazing is the right word, but all right, amazing. But as the companies that control web search have shifted from providing a service to selling products, search has slowly, inexorably evolved, and not in a good way, says the article. Today, a Google search for car rentals, for example, fills the first page with a series of Google-created car rental options and sponsored posts. It's frustrating, but it's worse than that. It's not search, it's advertising. And the article then goes on to really rail against the idea of what search has become in today's modern world. And I wonder, and I would love to get your take on this as someone who comes from both the technology side as well as the CMO side of the executives table. What do you think of search these days, and what's your take on this sort of complaint on what search is?
I thought it was a great article, from a ranting perspective. I mean, it's rather dramatic about this sort of the search was somehow amazing at the beginning and is no longer amazing. I think if you're trying to book a flight, for example, some of the things that Google are doing probably make it very, very easy for you as a consumer. So some of the things work with some people and some things don't. My view was, I think the very last part of what you said in the article, which was about, it, we're getting this service for free, right? And the thing is you're kind of getting what you're paying for. You are then the product, so therefore the advertising needs to be there because it's free. And we're now, as a society, addicted to free shit, right? And I also thought about, and I was thinking about this, about the fact that I think knowledge is something we're used to getting for free in a way, because we get it in school, we get it from books, we get it from the library. I mean, I know books aren't free, but what did we do before we had Google? Or you talk to the people that more experience you, or the elders. So it's always been a kind of a free transaction we're replacing Google with. But I think we have to understand, that has to be paid for somehow, right? And unfortunately, and it's not just Google, is it? We are as a society addicted to these free tools, and I like the article's view that something needs to be done about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because, you get to this idea of what a useful service, right?
Yeah.
That Google has become, and in many ways a indispensable service for many. It is how, the fact that it has become a verb, sort of says a lot about where it sits in sort of the popular culture and the way that we actually access information, to your point. And I wonder, though, as the service itself starts to become, as you said, we are the product in this case, because it's a free service.
Yeah.
At what point does it start to devolve into where we are, sort of, I mean, this is a bad metaphor, but if we're the mice in the cage and we're basically behaving in a way to optimize search results against advertising results. In other words, we're helping Google by behaving in a way that says, great, let's get more content out there, more information out there, so that, quite frankly, it's less effective to get the information. And Google then responds by saying, hey, listen, we're going to make it more efficient for you to get the information, and just scrape the stuff and put it right on our front page. And you can get to it if you click through an ad first, or if you actually view an ad, or whatever it is. There's a tension there that at some point I think has to break, right? Where we, as consumers of it, as marketers, have to start leading the other way around, right? In other words, we have to develop avenues around this to help people find our information to become more of a useful service, quite frankly, than Google. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But Google's like the gateway, isn't it? The keyhole into the world, and that's the way everybody is starting any kind of transaction. Is whatever you're thinking about, whether you're whether you're buying a banking system or an ERP system or something for the house, everybody starts with a Google. And one of the other things I was thinking about the experience, I've got a few thoughts on this. And one of the things I was thinking about the experience, the way the author was talking about in that article was, one of the things I was thinking about Google is, it seems the only education we need right now is how to be really good at Googling, right?
Right.
So that's
exactly.
the skill we need to teach our kids. And it's almost like the opposite of SEO, is that how, as humans, do we interact with the machine to get the most out of the machine? And I think what you were just saying is, how do we as marketers get ourselves, get our message across? And that's kind of like SEO, isn't it? But we're playing in the casino, aren't we, as marketers? And we have to, because that's where the consumers are. So until somebody takes a stand and breaks that cycle, then we all have to play, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, and I think, interestingly, and perhaps sort of ironically at this moment, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is, the one of the benefits, of course, of Google And exactly what you're talking about is the speed, right? The speed
Yeah.
by which we can make information accessible.
Mm-hmm.
These days, interestingly enough, social media is
Mm-hmm.
indexing even faster than Google, right?
True.
And
True.
so when
True.
we learn about something current event wise, right?
True.
When we learn about George Floyd, or we learn
Yeah.
about what's going on with Black Lives Matter, or we
True.
learn about what's going on with COVID-19, or we learn
Mm-hmm.
about that, typically we're not learning from Google. We're actually
True.
learning from the spread of social media, which,
Yeah.
an article spreads faster than
Yeah.
Google indexes it.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
that's an interesting idea
Yeah.
for
For
where
marketers.
we start to see, okay, where is the quality versus quantity versus speed of information and human
Yeah.
indexing, and how does that play a role in our sort of taking some of that responsibility for
Truth.
being the
Yeah.
keeper of information back, right?
Yeah.
Becoming a better service, quite frankly, than Google.
Yeah, and it's seeding that why is somebody searching for these terms, isn't it? It's the
Yeah.
pre-Google part of the thought process. But then I was thinking about the article a little bit, and I know we've only got a limited amount of time, but the other thing as well is what we're actually starting to interact with services and understanding information through things like through voice, through things like Alexa and stuff like that. So actually, the Google search bar that we search into isn't going to be the interface we use to these search engines. So I'm wondering how we then, I mean, right now on a screen, you can see 10, 15, whatever results it is, right? And you can see that first page, but you can't present that in voice. You can't say,
Right.
what's the best ARP system for a financial institution? Alexa's not going to say, well, there's probably 10-ish options, and one of them's like highlighted in red. I really like this one. This eighth one down, they look great. And it's not going to say that. It's going to say it's SAP or something like that, isn't it? And so I think it's going to be interesting as we move to interacting with the machine. The two things is we need to learn the language of the machine in order to get the best out of the machine, the same way as we need to learn how to teach the machine where our content is. And the other thing is we as marketers need people to search for us and seed into us, not ask for a pair of sneakers, but ask for Nike trainers, to ask for, so it's going to be even more important for us to get our brands out there. But anyway, I've wandered way off topic. I'm really sorry.
No, it's quite all right. It's just that I love the fact that you're suggesting that nuance plays a role. Well, you could go this way, or you could go that way.
Yeah, but that's what we're doing, right? When we look at a list of Google search results, we're making all sorts of decisions. We may not take the top or first, second one,
right,
and we may understand how the ad machine works and choose not to play. And we may choose that we look at the fourth or fifth, and then there's a bit of the copy that we not sure about. You're not going to be able to do that with voice.
That's right.
In a way, right? So
absolutely. Well, what it does is that it actually segues into something that I know that you've been thinking a lot about and have written about and have talked about quite a bit. And it's something I'm a huge fan of that you've created here, which is actually how do we become the utility? How do we become the service, right? So, beyond, and this goes beyond search, obviously, but this goes into how do we look at content as a utility, both definitions of that word. Tell the audience a little bit about what you mean by that sort of content as utility and sort of the bifurcating ideas of definitions.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the utility book here behind me somewhere, so I'm not trying to riff off. Who is it? Chris Bro? I can't remember who it was. That's terrible.
Oh, you're talking about Jay Bear, right?
Jay Bear. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Y-O utility. No, you mean
yeah. My nervousness of being on the show, I completely and he probably watches, and that's probably the end of it.
He does. I guarantee you, he does not. So
I thought everybody did, but anyway. What I mean by utility in the classic sense, and if you look at it in the dictionary, it means two things. The first thing it means is like gas, electric, water, a utility that we consume. And the other thing is utility as usefulness. And I think these are the two ideas I think content marketing is really about. It's about content being available within an organization. And also I started on this analogy, and it's a terrible analogy. I haven't written it down because I really need to think about it, is that let's imagine it's water inside the business. If it's employee engagement, you make it into tea. Right? And if it's for the customer, you're making it into your champagne, right? So but it's the same water. So I don't know whether that's really worked. Maybe I should write it down and think about it a bit more. But that's what I mean, is that we as content marketers have two jobs. One is to create the usefulness, so create the great content that's going to be useful to the audience, understand the audience and all that kind of stuff, which is where a lot of content marketing focus is. But then I think sometimes we forget about the content strategy and content operations and all the horrible, hard, boring things we need to do within our organizations to really get that content spread throughout the organization.
Well, it gets to this point, that we often make, and I know it's one that you and I have talked about before, which is, how do we start looking at the way content flows in a business, right? Just like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And how do we, instead of sort of trying to figure out, the ways that we might use, a million different smaller pieces and mash them up, how do we actually, before it starts to flow throughout the business, figure out all the ways it needs to flow throughout the business, and actually understand that before we, and not to belabor the metaphor, but before we actually turn on the spigot, right?
Thank you.
And actually understand all the uses, because what ends up happening, I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong here in the way that you're thinking about this, is that what tends to happen is we start, we turn on, all the water in the business, and then as it sort of drips out into the ceiling and onto the carpets and onto, and sort of leaks out everywhere, we go, oh, let's make that into champagne, but let's make that into, tea, and let's make that into, steam, so that we can power this thing. And everybody goes, it's just such a waste. It's just such, just such an overuse of energy to be able to do all of that. And instead, if we think it through and think through how we're actually going to use that content before it starts flowing through the business, we'd make things a lot more, effective.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've talked about this a few times. I mean, when I first started in web content management, I worked for Vignette back in the day. And one of the stories we used to tell about how you could get ROI on your content management system was, there was a story about Nestle Cadbury and how many images they had of somebody pouring milk, right? There was this story about how many millions of pounds, this is 20 years ago, how many millions of pounds I saved, right? And then in my last CMO job, I was talking to one of our customers, and they were a publisher. And they discovered that they had hundreds of pictures of strawberry cake for their recipe books. And they realized how much they'd spent shooting images of strawberry cake. So they're two different sides of the thing, but that's what I'm talking about if you don't make these things available to people. And most people, if you talk about digital asset management, for example, and you talk to clients that have implemented it, the first ROI is just that people knew what assets were available in the
exactly.
business. Simply that. If you could have just given them a search box to say, do we have any photos of New York? Yes! You don't need to go to New York. Brilliant. And there is and this is the problem, I think. I'm not going to get into a complete rant about the content management industry, but we just haven't solved some of the basic problems that 20 years ago we were talking about, and that bring enormous benefit to organizations. So I think that's the way I think about utility, is if at first, even if we all got the tap, let me carry on with this, or the spigot. If we all got the tap in our office, at least we'd know there was water, right? So, that's...
It's such a great point. I love that. I love that so much. Yeah. Well, it reminds me, I had a client that was in the insurance business, and, in the consumer insurance business. And she said, we went back and looked, and she said, we had 45 articles on distracted driving, texting.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That. She said, because quite frankly, it was just easier for a marketing manager to go, oh, I want to do something on distracted driving. Let's just have the agency create a new article instead of actually the difficulty, which is sad, the difficulty of actually searching through the digital asset management system to see how many there were. And so a 46th article gets added, and then a 47th and a 48th, and then it just becomes madness.
Yeah. Do you remember those Google appliances way back in the day?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where
You
we
and
were
I are
going
old, my friend. Yes.
well, they were going to plug Google into our enterprises, and we'd
That's
never
right.
have this problem, right? But nobody has they still haven't solved that problem. Well, I mean, the problem can be solved, but a lot of organizations face that challenge today, don't they?
Absolutely. Well, my friend, you and I could geek
Yes,
out
and we
on
almost
content
did.
management and digital asset management all damn day. For the sake of time here, tell people where they can find you and where they can learn more about what you're doing in consulting and all the things.
Well, I'm quite easy to find. If you Google Ian Truscott, it's me in this QC in London, and you'll know which one I am. I'm also at appropingo.com. I'm at rockstarcmo.com, and I'm at Ian Truscott on Twitter.
Fantastic.
Good,
my friend, thank you so much for being on the show today. I so appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, my friend. Thank you very much.
And that brings us to our last segment, which of course is one post on CMI's site that I'd love for you to take another look at, a third look at, or even a first look at. It's from our own Jody Harris, and from not so long ago. It was written for our Chief Content Officer, CCO, Digital Experience, and it's all about how to bring audiences together in what is now become the social distancing era. So as Jody opens up and she says, look, COVID-19 has turned handshakes into health hazards, but that doesn't mean that we have to keep our audience at an arm's length. So let's take a look at how businesses are using webinars, virtual conferences, and other kinds of digital experiences to foster community and audience in a touch-free world. Jody opens up by saying content marketing exists today to help brands and customers build those trusting relationships. And all of these digital touch points can help. But now, corporate travel restrictions and all of that, we're being asked to keep our friends and our neighbors and loved ones at a safe distance. So what are we doing? How do we actually replace some of the physicality that we've had in events with digital experiences? And she goes through some real specific examples, actual brands that are actually out there creating wonderful, sort of market-leading virtual types of content experiences. So go check it out. It's a great post and one that I think is just perfect for the theme of this week's show. And well, that's a wrap of episode number 79. I hope you're all out there taking care of each other. I mean, truly taking care of each other. I think it's so important these days that we take care of each other. Wear a mask, won't you? Just wear one. Just wear a mask. I mean, just be out there in the world and wear a mask. I'm so grateful that you've taken 35 minutes out of your day to watch or listen to this show. And I'm grateful for all of you. I really am. I'm hoping that you're doing well, and I hope you dig the show. We're having a ton of fun making it these days. So let us know, won't you? Hashtag us up at Weekly Wrap. Let us know what you might like to see on the show, any guests, any news items, any segments that you might want to see. And if you hate the show, like you're really not digging it at all, well, in the immortal words of Christina Aguilera, it makes me that much wiser. So thanks for making me a fighter. Made me learn a little bit faster. Made my skin a little bit thicker. Thanks for making me a fighter. But for now, which audience is real? Who are your real audiences? As content marketers, we can and should ask the same two questions about audiences that we do about customers. Are we perhaps creating audiences that are actually not good for the purpose of our business? And at what point are we creating a real audience? In most cases, if we do an audit of our audience, we're going to tend to see our own marketing shortcuts and shortfalls. Did we buy this email list? Are the percentage of actual customers in this audience in the single digits? Are these just people who will never purchase? Are these fake social followers? But we may also find that there are very vocal, active, or otherwise engaged audiences that are encouraging us to do things that are ultimately unproductive for the purpose of our business. They may have us questioning our point of view on a particular topic. They may have us jumping through hoops to develop content that's off topic or less useful to the real audiences we've built. It can be tempting when more and more people subscribe to our content to try and shoehorn all of them into having the same potential for wonderful value. Our job as content marketers is, of course, to invite guests to our ongoing show and make that experience as awesome as possible while they're here. But just as we're going to give some customers extraordinary experiences that they quite frankly don't really deserve, yeah, of course we're going to do that with audiences as well. but we'll also be really well served to define who, when, and where those audiences become real, lest we find ourselves with people that we occasionally have to escort out of the show. It's your story, folks. Tell it well. I'll see you next week on the Weekly Wrap.